Welcome back to the channel, everybody. The Premier League is in full swing, and it's time to assess how teams are doing as we enter the October month. We've got international break going on currently at the time of watching this. Obviously, some big games there between national teams, but we're going to talk Premier League this week, of course, throughout the break. But I want to go ahead and talk about how every single club is ranked in the Premier League this season. So as you can see here on your screen now, we've got a tier maker tier list. Of course, we've got it split A, B, C, D, and F tier. We've got no S tier because I wanted to split five groups of 4. I got that the wrong way around. But we're going to go ahead and talk about every Premier League club and where they sit and why they sit there this season. The first club we've got is Arsenal going into the A tier. I have to put Arsenal there just because, they're off to a great start. They've become set piece specialists this season with 45 in-swinging corners so far this season, showing a clear approach and a purpose in their set pieces. Declan Rice swinging them in, as well as Bukayo Saka. They've scored 3 set-piece goals, which is joint top in the league. I can't quite remember who they're tied with, but they are joint top. Trossard and Gabriel scoring twice, Trossard scoring, Gabriel scoring twice. The attention to detail is really what has set Arsenal apart from a lot of their opposition, and they're yet to lose a game, and that's why I've got them in A tier. Aston Villa, I have to put them in B tier. They currently have the second best defense on expected goals against, with 6.8, but they've conceded 9. So while they're playing well defensively, they are still letting in goals. They've scored the fewest among the top 6 clubs with 12. If Ollie Watkins had scored in a few key moments, like against Manchester United in a 0-0 game, it might be a different story. Still, defensively, they've been strong, but they need to improve the attack to really push higher up the table, which is why I'm putting them in B tier. Good start to the season in the Premier League. This I should also clear up. This is based on Premier League. Obviously, if I was including their entire body of work, they've just beaten Bayern Munich in the Champions League, and so we'd be talking a little differently about them. But we're just talking Premier League for the purpose of this video. Up next, we've got Bournemouth. Andoni Iraola's done well to get this side suiting defensive needs, with an expected goals against of 8.9. They're holding strong at the back, but they do need results. They need to turn some of these draws into results. They had fixtures, a draw against Chelsea, a draw against Leicester. Those are games they need to turn into wins, especially when you're playing Chelsea at home. If you can turn that 1-1 into a 2-1 in your favor, that would be huge and really help them climb out of the bottom half, which is why I've got them in C tier for this video. I think there's a little bit more they can do. I think they're perfectly about where I expected them to be, maybe just slightly below that, but they are C tier. When we go in to talk about the other teams, you'll understand where I'm coming from with that. Now we've got another team in C tier. It's going to be Brentford. It's been hit hard by key departures in players like Ivan Toney. However, injuries have also plagued the team this season. I think their fullback situation is a disaster right now. I think they've only got a couple of healthy fullbacks they're relying on to play almost every minute right now. They've done well to keep things tight given the injuries, but without a reliable figure at the back, it's tough to see them really pushing much higher. They brought in Van den Berg, who's been decent, who's been not bad, I will say. He stepped right into the team. They have adapted to some adversity, but it might not be enough to break them into the top half. Up next, we have another team in A tier, Brighton. Joint 4th for goals this season, and they've done it with a 10.7 non-penalty expected goals, which is 10th in the league. So while they're not performing on that expected goals, from non-penalty expected goals, they are putting the ball in the back of the net. Being joint 4th. They're getting a solid start to the season so far. Very good attack on the wings. Very solid team. I think everyone expected them to have a pretty good year once again, but they've exceeded expectations, beating very impressive teams and even drawing Arsenal on the road. Next team I'm putting into A tier is Chelsea. They've only lost once this season. It was the opening day against Manchester City. I can't remember if it was home or away, but a couple of home draws have slowed their progress, but there's still room for improvement in that team. They've got a solid foundation. Cole Palmer's performing. Nicholas Jackson looks much better this season. Caicedo looks much better, and with time they could finish in top 4. They look like a strong candidate for a top 4 finish, especially given some of the other teams that have really fallen off this season. Our first team in F tier is going to be Crystal Palace. I know it's tough. It's a tough give for them, but they've scored the second fewest goals in the league, and players like Nketiah, Eze, and Mateta haven't been delivering as expected. They're massively underperforming their expected goals this season, which tells us that they should be finding that more often than they are. Unless they can turn it around, this could be looking like a very bad season for Crystal Palace and could be in a relegation brawl. Moving into D tier, we've got our first team in D tier, another team that's kind of been off to a, not kind of, have been off to a slow start, didn't win a game in the first month of the season. Everton, very reliant on Dwight McNeil's creativity, and it's hurting them. They're struggling to get anything outside of McNeil's influence in the creative aspect of the game, and that's a problem. They need more options out on the wing. They need to continue to develop players that are able to create goals, not just scoring. They bring in these goal scorers, it feels like, every year, but nothing changes because there's no creativity in that squad. Now we've got a team in B tier, Fulham, a team that had a pretty solid season last season, once again doing well, currently in 8th position. 2 losses coming against tough opponents, Manchester City and United on the opening day. So most recent game and their first game they've lost. Everything else in between they've gotten a result. Big win against Newcastle and Nottingham Forest. They're about where they should be given the underlying numbers. Their expected goals against puts them around that 8th position. And if they keep performing at this level, I think they'll finish about there this season. Next team in the F tier has to be Ipswich. Very, very poor start to this season for Ipswich. Bottom of the table in expected goals for, and bottom of the table in expected goals against. That's 5.0 expected goals, 15.3 expected goals against. They're 17th in the table with just 6 goals scored. So outperforming that XG and technically doing better than what their expected goals against says, which is 14. Unless something changes drastically, Ipswich, you're going down. Another team going into F tier, another team that we didn't expect much from this season. One of the promoted teams, Leicester, second worst expected goal difference in the league with negative 1.34. That's ahead. That's just barely beating out Ipswich. And then this is expected goals difference per 90, and then not able to beat Palace away or Everton at home. It's results like that you need to get something from. You need to get some wins from, turn a few of these draws into wins, especially when against teams that are bottom of the table with you early on. Now we've got possibly a very controversial pick in the Liverpool pick here. We've got them going B tier. I don't think Liverpool have been all that impressive this season. They have the highest expected goals difference in the league with plus 1.23 expected goal difference per 90. The only problem is the toughest team they face is Nottingham Forest, and they lost that match. So they're doing well in terms of underlying stats, but they need to prove it against some stronger opponents to really impress me and really cement a spot in that A tier. Up next, we've got Manchester City in the A tier as well. There was always going to be a few teams missing out of that A tier when you've got these 4 teams performing at the level they are. There's another team we're going to talk about here in a second that feels like they maybe should be an A, and maybe we should have done an S tier with these first 8 teams, because they're all competing pretty well together with one another. And so it's kind of what you would expect. Second in the league at non-penalty goals minus XG, which is plus 3. So they're outperforming their XG by 3, even if you don't include the penalties. And then 13 non-penalty expected goals and 16 non-penalty goals scored, just to kind of tell you where the math is there. It's pretty easy from there. A tier, of course, very solid defensively. Are missing Rodri right now. Did see them drop points against Newcastle because of that. Pep Guardiola's words, they dropped points because of Rodri's injury. It'll be a tough season for them going forward, but I do think right now they're doing well, remaining unbeaten so far in the league. 17 goals, 8 conceded, leading the league in goals scored. Next team going into D tier has to be Manchester United. It's just been a poor showing for them. They have struggled despite ranking 7th in progressive passes. That's because they're 14th in progressive carries. The biggest concern is they're dead last in non-penalty goals versus expected goals. So with a dreadful -6, they're dead last in non-penalty goals minus expected goals. So again, same stat I just read you for Manchester City. That was a +3. United's a -6. So they're creating opportunities, failing to convert, and that's a huge problem for Manchester United going forward, is can they convert their chances? I did my 3 keys previously on United versus Tottenham's match, and United, they did not convert their chances even early on in that game when they were playing with 11 men. Up next, we have Newcastle, the final team in the B tier. I just don't think that they can get into that A tier right now, but I do think they're having a very solid start to the season, really grinding out results. Just to name a few, if we go look at it, they get a result against City, which if they turn that into a win is a whole nother thing, and maybe we're talking about this swap here, but we're not. We're talking about Newcastle currently in the B tier. And again, another result that hurt them is the draw against Everton. 0-0 draw. You got to be scoring against Everton, especially when you have a penalty. And Anthony Gordon missed the penalty. He played some of his worst games against Everton. I know it's his former club, but it's very poor from him. But I do still think Newcastle, for the expectations, they've just done above what I expected them to do this season. A very harsh decision here, but I had to put Nottingham Forest in C tier. They've gotten some good results, managed a big result against Liverpool, who they've beat, who we've already talked about. They turn a few draws into wins. We could be talking about a whole different story here. We would have them in B tier. We would be talking about them potentially even up into A tier if that was the case. But can't be putting them any higher here because they are doing about what we expect. Again, or excuse me, not what I expected, but what most people may have expected. Now we've gotten a harsh one here, but Nottingham Forest I've gotten C tier. I think that they have had a probably decent start to the season, but it could be better. They could be doing more. They could be, turning some of these draws into wins. They obviously get a big win against Liverpool, and that could almost put Liverpool or Fulham or Newcastle into C, and then put Nottingham Forest into B. It's very tight at the bottom of. It's interesting. The bottom of B and top of C is very close, but the top of B and bottom of A is very close. So it's like just one result flips. If Liverpool's unbeaten right now, don't lose to Fulham, to Forest, they're easily A tier. If Forest gets a result against a team like a Brighton or against a Fulham or against a Chelsea, they're in B tier, and we're talking differently about the other teams. So it's a lot of these results that are just kind of edging it in some of these teams' favor. Maybe Liverpool should be the only one that maybe drops down, but they are top of the table regardless. They are getting the results. You can only beat who's in front of you. Liverpool have been doing that, so fair play to them. Southampton have been awful this season, and that's why I've got them in the F tier, the final team in the F tier. They've conceded the joint most set-piece goals this season with 6. They have been woeful at defending set pieces. They're also playing a style that leaves them vulnerable at the back. When they turn the ball over, they always look like they're going to give away a chance, an opportunity for the opponent to score, and it doesn't look good for Southampton moving forward. Very, very worrying for them. Next team and the final team in C tier is going to be Tottenham. I've got to put Tottenham there. They've gotten off to a really poor start. 14 goals scored, though. It's harsh because they're not getting results. It's harsh because they've had good underlying numbers, but it's realistic because they're not getting the results, though. Tottenham will finish behind the 3 teams they've lost to, which are Arsenal, Newcastle, and Brighton this season. They've shown some quality, but against the top sides, they've struggled to compete. Spurs need to find consistency if they really want to push for one of these European spots. West Ham, who I've got in C tier, have had a very average start to this season. 2 wins, 2 draws, 3 losses. The only new signing with a goal or assist so far is center back Max Kilman. If they want to rise up the table, they'll need more from their attacking players, especially some of these new signings. Somerville, Nicholas Füllkrug, players like that are these attacking signings you expect more from. They need the output if they want to go forward. And finally, the last team in D tier, I've got Wolves, and the only reason I'm giving any of the slack here is they're performing about as I expected. I knew they were going to look really bad this season. 21 goals conceded, worst in Premier League currently. It's been a difficult campaign, but it's about what we anticipated with the start to their season. Let's read out some of these matches they've had. They face Arsenal on the opening day, lose 2-0. Chelsea the next week, 6-2. Forest get a 1-1 draw. A win there would have been much more preferred, obviously. Then they face Newcastle. Then they face Aston Villa. Then they face Liverpool. Then they face Brentford, who they lost 5-3 to this weekend. And that's the worrying one. That's the damning result because Brentford's a team they should not be conceding 5 goals to. As for the Forest one, you can make the excuse Forest were very, very good. Forest were very good coming into that match. That was right. That was right before they drew 1-1, beat Liverpool 1-0. So it's very hard to say that Wolves should have gotten anything from that. But Brentford, probably a team they should have done a little bit better and expected a result from. But anyways, as there goes with every single ranking, every single prediction, every single anything like this, any sort of analysis, there's always going to be disagreement. So be free to talk about it in the comment section down below. These are my rankings. This is what I went with. I think there's been some solid performances. I still think some of these C teams with a result or two going their way bump up into B tier. I see some of these teams that have, been in B tier and maybe a result or two don't go their way, could have been in A tier, so on and so forth. And let me know if you agree or disagree. I do think there's a few teams that uh, are really, really looking at October as a potential opportunity to sack their manager. I think that this international break, I'm surprised we haven't seen any this week so far, but it's going to be interesting to see what happens as we get back. And, if a team like a Manchester United start off with a loss returning from international break, do we see a manager like Erik ten Hag get sacked? If he does, we'll do a keep or sell with the new manager or the new regime in general because, they've got Ineos there. But I will see you in the next video. Peace.